Hello and welcome to another episode of Fintech Focus TV with me, Toby. Today, delighted to bring something a little bit different for you today, and very, very pleased to introduce you to James Gorman from BioMe. James, how are you?
Very well, Toby. Thanks for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. Listen, this is a topic which is really relevant because I think we were talking beforehand. The financial technologists this year will be looking at the top 1% of workplaces. And within that, and I think particularly over the last couple of years, we've seen more and more focus on great workplaces, really looking into the wellness and the performance of the individuals within those businesses. So it's become something which has been a very sort of relevant point and probably over hashtagged at various different stages and all those sort of things. But there's people making real change. And James is one of those. So James, before we go into the details, and there's loads and loads for us to cover over the next half hour or so, tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, and why you founded BioMe in 2018 and how you're helping.
Yeah, look, I'll certainly give you a sense of my background and how I arrived at it. It's sometimes useful to think about sort of where we are now. And we talked about this just before we started rolling, that, I think most organizations have moved beyond that point of trying to decide whether employee well-being is a good thing. I think most people understand that now. So, it's really now a question of what action are you taking to improve employee well-being. And, rightly so. People get this idea now that health, well-being is one of, if not the biggest drivers of individual performance, team performance, and performance of the whole organization. The question is, are they getting it right? So are these well-being initiatives, are these well-being strategies, well-being programs that you see out there, are they getting it right? In other words, are they driving long-term change? Because it's really long-term change that matters. And if they're not getting it right, not only is it are they going to be out of pocket at the end of it with no real result, they're going to get left behind those organizations that really do get it right. Because it's those organizations that are having more of the employees coming with more energy, more enthusiasm, more engagement more of the time, and that really does make a difference to performance. And what we saw when we're thinking about this space is there are very few, if any, well-being providers programs that really do that. Most really fail to do that, and so that's why we wanted to come into this this space and really fill those gaps. And actually it takes quite a different approach, which we can talk about, and the sort of things that we recommend to people. And the reason I kind of arrived here in the first place, I worked in investment banking for a long time, for about 15 years, mostly in London, latterly in Dubai for about 18 months. And look, I loved my job, and I loved the people. I worked with some great people, great managers, and had a great time. But it really started to affect my health. And in 2006, I actually went in for emergency surgery, almost died on the operating table. I was diagnosed with something called Crohn's disease, which many people will be familiar with or kind of know what it is. It's an intestinal disease. Yeah. And I had surgery, and I had the usual, long-term pharmaceutical treatment for it. And of course, I dived straight back into the work and lifestyle that arguably had sort of landed me there in the first place. So stressful job, crazy hours, not getting enough sleep, not eating great food, drinking the whole thing. And I did that for another 8 years or so before I kind of finally got the joke that, perhaps my choices had something to do with my health. And, I was in my early 30s at the time. I should have got it way before that. Anyway, so I made the decision at that point, I need to sort this out. Right? I need to sort my lifestyle out. That's probably the most powerful tool I've got. Started researching it, reading lots of books and all the rest of it. Sorted my diet out first, which frankly is it's a work in progress. It's constant experimentation, isn't it, to kind of find the right thing. Started doing the right kind of exercise, perhaps the right amount of exercise. Started focusing on sleep, all of the things that matter, and really got control of this problem and got off the medication, and kind of realized at that point really how powerful this stuff is if you do it. Right? It's all very well thinking about it in theory, but if you do these things, it can make a big difference. We were out in Dubai at this point, and I sort of came to this conclusion that the one thing that I hadn't addressed was the elephant in the room, which I was still working in this industry, still working in this job. And I'd kind of fallen out of favor with it maybe for the previous 2 or 3 years. And in some ways that that was a catalyst for change, as well as me thinking, look, my health probably depends on me getting out of this thing. And fortunately or unfortunately, we're actually closing the business down in Dubai. I was offered a job back in London, but it was a junction at which I could take a different turn. And so I did. I left the banking business, went to university, did a degree in nutrition science to kind of learn more formally about the physiology, the biochemistry of what I'd experienced myself, and started to build this intention of, how do I use my experience, the knowledge that I've built to kind of feed that back into the system that partly led me to being ill. How can I help other people sort of avoid maybe some of the pitfalls that I fell into and be well? So, and then that was the initial thing, which turned into, it's not just about preventing illness, right? Because of course, look, if you get an illness like I did, you're out for months, right? There's no bigger, other than dying, right? There's no bigger impediment to performance than just being in a hospital bed for months. And so, of course, that's important. But I think the problem that a lot of organizations have is a much more low-level sort of chronic version of underperformance than that, where people are just turning up, just not feeling great, and often maybe not even realizing it. And so, this idea of well-being, if you like, which is probably a good word to encapsulate it all, is everything from trying to deal with illnesses, prevent illnesses, but also just helping people perform better, right up to, maybe something like athletic performance. Even people that are super fit and healthy already and have got great diets, maybe they want to go further, right? It's about that as well. It's all about well-being and performance. So it's all of those things, and that's really what BioMe do. And the co-founder of BioMe, who's not on this call, he's a physiotherapist by trade, and he's an elite athlete as well. So he kind of brings that piece to it, and has arrived at a similar place to me, but from a completely different context.
So tell me what you're doing then. As you said, look, there's lots of different initiatives that people are doing, and I think initiative is obviously a dangerous word in a lot of companies as well, where it's something which people start and stop. Yours is a much more longer term solution. Tell me how you're helping and how you engage with the companies you're working with.
Well, I think there's three things that I think would be useful for organizations to think about in the context of looking at wellbeing strategies, wellbeing programs, whatever you want to call them. The first one is to make it as efficient as possible. Now, this sounds really obvious, because this is how businesses and most organizations think in everything that they do. They want to make things efficient. They want to maximize the return on investment, whatever that investment is, whether it's money or time, or effort. They want the biggest return for it. And that always involves focusing on the things that matter the most, the things that make the most difference, right? It's the 80-20 Pareto principle for well-being. It should equally apply to what they're doing in well-being, but seldom does, at least in the things that we've seen. So that's the first thing. Concentrate on the things that matter most. And that's the organization and the individual level. The second piece is prioritize what I'd call continual incremental improvement. So rather than say, we want to get you to this amazing result in 6 months, right? Forget this sort of goal-oriented, results-focused approach, and just prioritize continual incremental improvement, because that's when we see the long-term trajectory that organizations really want and that they really need. And the third piece is, of course, you want to help as many people as you can in the organization. But counterintuitively, we think you can do that in the best way by actually focusing on fewer people. And what I mean by that is you want to focus on the people that really want help, that really want to change, that really want to improve. And by doing that, you can actually start to help a much bigger portion of the population.
Word spreads.
Yeah, well, that's part of it. So word spreads, and in some ways you get sort of unwittingly or otherwise ambassadors for the initiative throughout the organization, and in conversation, other people get encouraged to do things. But actually, as we can talk about, one of the big things that is crucial for sort of long-term behavior change is to cultivate an environment, so an office environment and culture that's conducive to better choices. So if you create that for the people that want it, it also helps nudge everybody else in the right direction, even without them realizing. Right? So there are various ways you can help the broader spectrum of the population by focusing on a small group.
As you mentioned, that there are people there who will raise their eyebrows and be skeptics, to wellbeing initiatives, and be cynical around the sort of motivations and incentives and thought process behind it and all that sort of stuff. And there's no changing that, right? There's, as you're intimating, it's like saying, let's look for people who are ready for change. I think, I'm always fascinated by that change curve of either it's hurting so much that people need to make a change, or there's an incentive that's so big that people will make a change. And otherwise people don't, will often resist change in this sort of environment. How much are you talking about helping people who are, not too far off where you were when you hit that hospital bed, and who are those? Who is that 20% of people who really engage with this?
Well, I think there's a very small proportion of people that would have what I'd call an epiphany. Yeah, right? and having an epiphany is a very good driver of long-term change, but it's a very small proportion of people that have that, and people like I experience, who've gone through either an enormous amount of pain or have a very big health incentive to do that. That being said, don't forget, it took me 8 years to figure that out. It's not like I came out of hospital and went, right, kind of that's it. If somebody had come a year after I'd come out of hospital and said, hey, how about this wellbeing thing? I would not have been interested. And I had more motivation than most people do. And so I totally get it, right? You've got to want to change before change is at all possible. Never mind, sort of long-term change. Then beyond that, beyond the sort of small epiphany people, you've got to, and it's probably a smaller percentage than we really like to think it is, but who really say, look, yeah, I get this. I get the importance of this. I'd love to be, healthier in this way or that way. I just can't seem to do it. I don't know the right things to do. And there's a good chunk of people like that. And they're the people that I think we can, really make a difference with. And I think that's who organizations should focus what I'd call their direct wellbeing efforts on, because they're the ones that are much more likely to make longer term change and therefore affect the rest of the population, but affect the performance of the organization.
Valuable masses behind it. It's an interesting thing, as you say, because look, this has been something that's been more and more heavily on boardroom agendas for the last 18 months, in particular with the pandemic. I was quite surprised when you said, when we were talking beforehand about it being something that was really difficult as a business that started in 2018 to see, the world stop in 2020, with lockdowns and all that sort of stuff, where for a stage it was knocked off the agenda, where people worried about getting people working remotely and all this sort of stuff, and now it's sort of swung very back into vogue, shall we say, and right on the agenda and come through your business. Talk to me a little bit about that in your sort of journey over the last couple of years, and how the business has fared, and why it's and why the interest is raising again now.
Yeah, look, we're no different to a lot of other businesses, of course, that struggled in that sense during lockdown, because their sort of previous business largely dried up because of changing priorities, and it's absolutely understandable. We had a few good clients prior to lockdown, and they were really good to us in the sense that we managed to complete the work we were doing with them online. So we kind of like most people did, migrated to online working. But new business conversations for us pretty much ground to a halt. Again, really understandably, of course, we spoke to people about it. Look, we've got so many things to worry about at the moment. No one knew how long this was going to last for a start, right? People thought it might be a month, maybe even 2 months, 3 months max. And of course, it went on for more like 18. The wellbeing agenda, even though the pandemic heightened the importance of it, doing anything about it seemed to have been knocked down the agendas a little bit. Again, understandably, it was about prioritizing the work that needed to get done. I think what's interesting now is, as we start to come back and people start going back to offices and some kind of normality, comes back into the workplace, the catalyst from the pandemic that I think has made all, work, employees, everybody has understood now that how important health is to to not just work, but to life, to fighting off viruses, to being able to show up to work, etc. So that the importance of that has been highlighted even more. And I think what's changed is that organizations are, of course, now talking about it again, but they're taking it a lot more seriously than they were prior to lockdown, because it's become apparent not only how important it is, but how important it is to sustain that for 5, 10, 20, 30 years, to have a really long-term view, again, like organizations do about every other part of their business. Of course, they're thinking long-term about building the right team, about building diversity in the team, about revenue growth over 5, 10, 20 years. They're not thinking about 6 months, right? Nobody thinks about 6 months because they know things change in that time. Whereas traditional well-being programs tend to be 6 months, which is I've always found quite odd. And we can talk about those. It's quite an interesting case study, actually, talk about these 6-month programs, because it highlights sort of some of the pitfalls around what I'd call the traditional approach to well-being.
Yeah, please do. Tell us around that.
Well, if you think about where we've come over the last 10 years, the well-being industry, the employee well-being industry, as I'd call it, has really been focused on one aspect of health, which is metabolic health, which is, when it comes down to it, really how well we acquire, store, and use calories, right? So it's about your body weight, your body composition, blood markers like blood sugar and cholesterol, and blood pressure, fitness, things like that. So that's what we'd call metabolic health. It was really all about that. So the last 10 years, and there were these programs have become very popular, and they're always 6 months, right? Maybe some of them are 3, but usually most of them are 6 months. Some big companies, big successful employee wellbeing companies that do this 6-month program. It looks a bit like this, and you might be familiar with them. So they get the participants in, so the group of employees that's going to take part in the program. They do a whole battery of baseline testing, right? So they do body composition and blood pressure and comprehensive blood tests, and say, okay, you're overweight or your blood sugar's too high, therefore this is what you need to fix, right? And then, so it's all about what they should do, yeah? And then they have a goal setting. So they set very stringent, time-restricted, specific goals, like you need to lose 10 kilos of body weight or something like that. And then it's the 6 month of the intervention. So it's usually mainly focused around diet. There's some exercise in there as well. So it's kind of a diet and exercise thing, with sort of a monthly catch-up, right? So it's all about motivation, so goal setting and motivation. And then at 6 months, they retest. They do all those tests that they did at the start again, right? And that is then the measure of success. Yeah, so you've lost weight, or the blood sugar's come down, or whatever it is. Now, what's interesting is the results at 6 months from these programs, if we take their word that they're accurate, and we've no reason not to do that, they look pretty good. Right, the average results look pretty good. People lose weight on average, and people's blood sugar comes down average, blood pressure, all of that stuff. And then the organization's happy because it's done exactly what it said on the tin. 6-month improvement, great. What do you think happens after 6 months?
Reversion, right? And we know this not only from our personal experience, right? Because the classic diet thing that we all try and do for a few months and then it falls away. There are literally thousands of diet and exercise trials out there that are usually 3, 6, 9, 12 months. Almost always, almost in every single trial, and certainly on average. But it's almost ubiquitous. Results peak at 6 months, and then they decline. Always. And often revert right to baseline. Even if the trial, or the program, as you could call it, carries on for longer than 6 months. So there are long trials that extend out to 4 years, when you have a monthly thing for 4 years, right? So they try and keep the motivation going. Even in those trials, we see a decline after 6 months and a reversion, which I think is, very misleading on the part of these providers, first of all, because they know this. They know that results peak at 6 months, and they're happily telling you it's been great, it's succeeded, making you assume that that means long-term improvement, and it doesn't. And we know that, and the evidence is very, very strong on that. The question is why? Why does that happen? Well, there are largely 3 reasons. One is
there are some physiological reasons why that happens. There's physiological adaptations in the body that fight against some of those things. So we strongly fight against weight loss, for example. It's a survival thing, right? It goes back to when we didn't have quite enough food. So that's still there. And it applies to weight loss and some other things, but we'll park that because that's a whole other conversation. But I think the two others that are interesting here are, one is that these programs and these scientific trials, they rely on two things to change behavior. They rely on, rely on three things, actually: information, so education, motivation, and goal setting. Right? They're what they rely on to change people. None of those change behavior long term. And again, the science is pretty clear about this. And the third reason is that they ignore how human behavior really works. And so if we want to address those things, we have to address the reasons why people tend to stop doing these new diets, new exercise regimes, new anything after about 6 months. You know, we can go through each of those because it's quite good to hang this sort of concept off. But, you know, we know conceptually why the information doesn't change behavior. Right? We've all got a lot of knowledge about what we should be doing or what we could be doing to improve our health, but not many of us really do it. In other words, there's no shortage of information. If you want to improve any aspect of health or performance, you could go on the internet tomorrow and find some really good information, really good stuff. But we're still in the midst of a health crisis. I'm not talking about COVID, right? So it's not due to a lack of information that we're not changing. Information does not change. Information alone doesn't change behavior. Motivation doesn't change behavior either. Now, this is a bit of a contentious point because this is what most people rely on to try and make any change. Now, we need some element of motivation to do anything, right? To do any behavior, we need to be somewhat motivated to do it, but we can't rely on it because motivation is a really fickle partner because it changes all the time. And we only have to think about New Year's resolutions to know this is true, right? How many of us set ourselves these really big New Year's resolutions and we start in January where our motivation's really high? You know, we've had a rough Christmas, we've drunk too much, we've put on weight, right? We're motivated. Let's do it in January. Let's hit the gym 3 times a week.
New year, new me.
Yeah, exactly. How many weeks do we continue that for? 1, 2, maybe.
I'd love to see the drop-off rate at gyms after
exactly.
After January.
And the reason for that is because motivation changes. It falls away and we can't control it. And as soon as we don't have it, we stop doing the stuff. And the other piece is goals. And this is even more contentious because we always hear about goal setting and results focus, don't we? That doesn't change behavior either. Now, again, goals are important because they set a direction for where we want to go and they can be useful for course correction along the way. But focusing on goals and results is completely counterproductive, not just in well-being. I think we see it in sports, we see it in business as well. You know, why is that? One is because we can't control the result. We have no control over the ultimate result at all. All we can control is the actions and decisions we take every day.
This is one of my favourite books by Bill Walsh of the San Francisco 49ers. The score takes care of itself, right? Focus on the process and the score takes care of itself, which is, it just shrieks off what you're talking about. And it's adaptable to any sort of scenario as far as I'm concerned as well, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's dead right. I mean, it's a great book, isn't it? And I think,
love it. Yeah.
You know, probably, one of, if not the best American football coaches in history. And he specifically talks about, like, don't focus on goals. The last thing you want to do is focus on results because they take your focus away from what really matters. And what really matters is how you act in any minute, in any moment, in any given day. And it's true here too. And, you know, Bill Walsh is not the only one. Alex Ferguson, probably the greatest sports manager in history now. He did exactly the same thing. It took him 6 seasons to win the league when he came to Manchester United. He wasn't focused on winning the league. What he was focused on was building a football club because he knew if he designed and executed the right processes and the right systems for that, then glory would come. And sure enough, we know the rest of the story. But he specifically didn't focus on it, and he focused on what really mattered.
Other than taking a certain team off their perch.
Yeah. Maybe that was part. Maybe the team they wanted to be. Yeah. And it's not just sport. Like we see it in business. Steve Jobs never talked about profit. He never talked about it in public. Never talked about it in the press. Never talked about it internally with employees, with his leadership team. Never talked about it. All he ever talked about it was the quality of the product and the process to get a quality product. And of course, he went on to make Apple the most valuable company of all time at that time. So we see it everywhere, and yet most of us don't act on that. We keep coming back to this goal and results kind of focus. And think about it in a well-being context. In these 6-month programs, you get to 6 months, right? And let's say the goal was to lose 10 kilos in 6 months, right? So you get there and you've lost 11 kilos. Right? Brilliant, you've met your goal. Then what? You've reached that end point. You've done it. How many people? It's
also at a phase, isn't it, where the improvement slows down. And that's the bit where I think you've got the biggest mental challenge all the way through it, where you're seeing big results at the start, and then it's only very incremental there afterwards.
Yeah. So the cost benefit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah. So the effort required to maintain that thing, but also because you've achieved the goal, you've got the medal.
Yeah.
It's rest time, right?
Yeah, and that's
it's recovery time and then the other side is, what if you don't make it? What if you lose 5 kilos? What if you do all the right things and you only lose 5 kilos? You feel like you failed.
Yeah,
and that construct makes you think you failed, and then you think, well, I failed, so what I was doing didn't work, so you stop doing it.
Yeah, and then you lose all.
And then you've thrown away a good system because you were too focused on an arbitrary result and an arbitrary point in time. So it comes back to
that spiral as well, isn't it, of focus on what you're doing, and which then, as the results move further away and you're not seeing those sort of wins, it affects the next spiral of confidence in what you're being able to do and how you can do it, and then it whittles down into motivation afterwards. So I'm very, very fascinated psychologically about that focus. Confidence, motivation, access, and how that can impact within it, which is a big part of everything you're talking about, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
So with this sort of very short term, I guess there's a difference in my mind between an initiative and a strategy, and you're talking a lot about strategy there and putting something in place which is essential to companies. When we're talking here about better, there is a plague of underperformance given by people running on this hamster mill and potentially not playing at their best every single day. And I think if you're looking in elite environments, it's about people turning up and being able to be about 8, 9, 10 out of 10 consistently, week in, week out over time, because they're allowed to play at that sort of performance. They think about that sort of level and play, condition themselves to be the very, very best, which you see in sport all the time, right? Some of the all-time greats are the ones who've really invested in this to allow that to happen. And there's a lot of people who fall by the wayside who haven't necessarily had that same sort of strategy. What we're talking about here is implementing stuff, and what you're able to do is implement, processes into a business over a long-term play, which allows them to play at their best. Tell me how you do that, and how you work with companies to break the curse of underperformance, to bring, to improve retention, to allow better recruitment, to increase engagement. We were talking beforehand about the Gallup polls of the extraordinary numbers of unengaged people in workplaces all over the world at the moment, and particular focus, I think, in the US and the UK, of how many under-engaged people there are in workforces. What are you and BioMe doing to help companies not just fix it for the short-term burst, but taking the long-term vision of it as well?
Yeah, I mean, you're right about the underperformance. And again, you can look at metrics like presenteeism, which is that phenomenon of people turning up to work while they're ill or not performing at their best. And I think the statistic is 84% of companies in this case. We say organizations because we cover schools and education institutions and other organizations. But in companies, I think it's 84% of companies have observed some degree of presenteeism. People showing up to work on a fairly regular basis while they're ill, never mind just underperformance. So yeah, it is a big problem. So I think there's two things that organizations need to think about for driving that long-term change. So or in my words, driving that continual incremental improvement. There's working with individual employees, and there's working with the environment and culture of the organization. So from an individual employee point of view, it comes back to this system. So we talked about goals versus systems, didn't we? So what is the right system? Well, it's the system that empowers them to make that incremental continual improvement. And there's a couple of parts to that. One is what should you do as an individual? And that comes back to this efficiency thing. So when you look at the data, the most efficient things that most people can change is what they eat, how they move, and how they sleep. In some ways, those have kind of become a bit old hat in a way. They're sort of not the trendiest things to do anymore. But when you look at the evidence, they're still the most important. And most people have got a lot of room for improvement in those three things. They're the things that make the most difference. But at an individual level, what combination of those things, specifically what within those categories should people do? And then that's a one-to-one approach of personalizing an efficient toolkit, if you like. So that's the what. But then there's the how. So how do they implement that? And we use a system called Tiny Habits. But again, a proven behavior change system is what you need. The system we use was created by a gentleman called Dr. BJ Fogg, and he's the director of the Behavior Design Lab at Stanford University out in California. So he definitely knows his human behavior stuff, and he's created this system for personal change. And so I've trained with BJ, and I'm sort of a certified Tiny Habits coach. So that's the system we use. Very simple, very effective. And the essence of it is this. You take a behavior you want to do, you make it really small, you find where it fits in your life, and you nurture its growth. And when you do that, what you find is you embed, or you turn that behavior into a habit. That habit becomes embedded. That habit then grows all by itself, and it spreads to other habits. And when those multiple habits start compounding, then you get transformational change. That might be at 6 months. It might be at 10, 25, like who knows? That's kind of not the point. It's the process. And that's the exact opposite of this go big or go home mentality that a lot of us have got ourselves into. And the best analogy, and this is something we use in Tiny Habits, is if you want to grow an oak tree in your garden, right? You don't go and dig up a fully grown oak tree from the forest and try and ram it into your flower bed, right? Because even if you manage to do that, the first breeze of wind is gonna knock it flat. What you do is you get a seed or a little sapling, and you find the right place in your garden where it's going to get the most light and the most water and the most nutrients and the space to grow. And you nurture it. And there's a system for growing plants. You water it and you feed it and you protect it. And it doesn't look like it's growing for months or maybe even years when it comes to big trees, but the roots are going in. That system works. You believe and trust in it, and you keep going. Because once those roots are in, it's become embedded, it's impossible to knock it over. And when it's impossible to knock over, then it can start to grow. And then it can grow to an unlimited size almost, or an enormous size, depending on how much room it has. And that's really what we need to do with habits. It's turning what we think we need to do completely on its head. We don't want to go big. We want to go really small, and we want to nurture carefully, because when it starts to grow, it not only grows in and of itself, it starts to spread its seed to other parts of the garden.
It's really interesting, isn't it? I've just recently finished reading Atomic Habits, which is all about the power of habit and incremental growth. And I think that's a really important piece to engage with, because I think people are looking for, in every aspect of life, because of digitalization of it, everyone's looking for instant gratification, isn't it? It's click your fingers and everything's done. But this particular area, I don't think is a click your fingers matter for it's particularly over a size of an organization to grow it. And I think with people like you doing what you're doing, it's really exciting to see the transformation and the focus on this and where it can come through. Because when we're looking at organizations we work with and companies out there who are performing, all of them will tell you about the importance of people. It's what keeps me in a day job, finding the best people for the best, for the best businesses. But I think people are also, particularly in this day and age, seeing retention rates, go at different levels, and staff performance levels come into it. And those who are investing in this and really thinking about their strategy for it and making sure they think, I can see it in my business, even, one of the benefits of the last 18 months has been a completely different viewpoint of this. And I think it's dramatically improved performance per head, which is an extraordinary thing to come out of a pandemic. And it's dramatically increased, levels of both engagement and long-term, performance of individuals as well. But the sickness ratios are down. Every metric you want to see about individual performance has been improved. And I think we're just at the start of what we can achieve with it. So. Yeah, really interesting. I mean, I told you this would go quickly, and I just looked at the clock and see how far over we've gone with it. But it's, James, I could be talking about this for a long, long time with you, and it feels like there's so much more to cover. So maybe we can get that in another show pretty soon. I'm thrilled to have you, involved in the judging for the 1% awards as well. It is an absolute pleasure hearing you and just chatting through some of these things already. People here who are listening to this and thinking, actually, do you know what, this is an opportunity in our business, and I say opportunity as opposed to a problem, but either of those within it. James, how do they get in touch with you, and what's the best way to reach BioMe and find out more?
Our website is biome-wellbeing.com. So you can reach us on email at team@biome-wellbeing.com. You'll find us under BioMe Wellbeing on LinkedIn. That's where that's the platform we tend to use the most, and we've got all our content goes out on there. So they're the best ways to find us and to get in touch.
Superb. Well, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom today. There's loads more I know that we can tap into later on as it happens as well. I wish you nothing but the biggest of success with it all. It sounds like it's going really great guns so far. It's been lovely talking to you.
Yeah, likewise, Toby. Thank you. Thanks very much for having me on. It's been good fun.
Absolute pleasure. And thank you all for watching. We will see you soon on another episode of Fintech Focus TV. Thanks ever so much.